As soon as I sold my startup and had enough cash to live off of for the foreseeable future, I decided that I've had enough of city life. I sold everything I could, including my car, put the rest in storage, and went shopping for a farmhouse. Until recently, I never would have imagined myself living in a farm. I had a natural disdain for rural areas, bugs, and uneducated people. But having spent the last decade in front of a computer and watched my 20s vanish away, I yearned to look for something more meaningful in my life. When I thought of nature, I always thought of Greece. I traveled there in the past as a kid a few times, perusing through the tourist places with my family, and I always found it strangely alluring and unique. Of course, it didn't hurt that the cost of living there was much lower than where I was living in Europe at the time. The idea of buying land in Greece was planted in my head. It didn't matter how preposterous it was to leave everything and everyone behind and go to a place where I knew little about besides the fact that it was warm and affordable. I arrived in the island of Crete early July in the middle of a heat wave. When my flight finally landed in the early hours of the morning, it was already dizzying hot, but it didn't bother me at all. I was finally free. I saw a listing for a beautiful olive farm in a small village near Chania, which was close to the beach but hidden in green hills. It looked straight out of a postcard, so I scheduled a visit the next day without even thinking twice about it. The owner of the estate was a young Cretan farmer named Antonis, and it's he that I would have the pleasure of meeting in a few hours. I hailed a taxi, which was delighted to have a customer for a long fare at such an ungodly hour. It took longer than expected to arrive, not because the place was very far, but because the twisting and narrow roads made it difficult to drive fast, though not for lack of trying by the driver. I didn't mind, of course. The unpolished nature of this place was exactly what I hoped it would be. Old roads that snaked around hills, and from where you would occasionally glimpse at an endless blue expanse. We arrived after an hour to a small village where the road ended, and I was dropped off. I was told that the farm would only be a few minutes away from here, which would technically be true if I was traveling with a helicopter. Granted, the final stretch was a dusty track meant for tractors, not cars. I found an elderly group of people to ask for directions, but they had no idea what I was talking about or what I was doing there. But there was no need. When I looked around me, I recognized the hills and the landscape from the pictures I saw. So I walked down the hill and out of the village, which is where the farmhouses seemed to be. A few hundred meters in, I found a building that seemed familiar. When I approached, I spotted someone in the distance. A male figure, young, tanned, and dressed casually in light summer clothes. He appeared to be working in the front yard, pulling up weeds with his back turned on me, and hadn't noticed my presence. I approached hesitantly, not knowing for certain that I was in the correct place and not wanting to trespass. I got closer, though he remained oblivious to my presence, focusing instead on his work. I couldn't help but notice the strength in his posture, the way the sunlight played across his shoulders as he worked quietly under the summer heat. A thin layer of sweat on his neck caught the light in an almost cinematic way. I suddenly felt a bit shy approaching him so casually like this. The only sound around was the cicadas. I tried to focus on the reason I was here. Could this be the owner? I cleared my throat, loudly, and again, "Excuse me." The young man turned to look at me, startled. I took into full view. He was definitely not dressed to meet guests, but he also seemed young enough that maybe this was his normal state of dress for manual labor. It was hard to say. Hello, he said in a distinct accent, looking surprised to see me. "Hi," I said, tried to ignore how attractive he was or how odd to be talking to a stranger in their underwear. "I'm sorry to startle you. I'm here for the farm estate that's for sale. Do you happen to be Antonis?" "Ah, yes. You must be." He paused, trying to recall my name. I clearly hadn't made much of an impression to the young Greek. I stepped closer, extending a hand. "How nice to meet you." He came right in and shook my hand cordially, still a bit flustered from seeing me. "Zai, Tao." Sorry, I forgot it was today. Standing so near him, I couldn't ignore the smell faintly of the outdoors and honest labor. I took a small step back and glanced at his outfit again. "Did I catch you at a bad time? I can wait. If you need to go change." I I struggled to keep my eyes on his face. No, of course. This is fine. He looked around and then back at me, embarrassed but also a little amused. This is how I work most days when it's hot like this. He glanced down, and I awkwardly followed his gaze before looking away, which I happily followed with mine. There's no women around, and this way I don't have to do any laundry. He chuckled and looked at me again to gauge my reaction. I forgot myself for a moment, trying not to stare at his figure from behind through the damp fabric. No, I totally get it. Please, carry on. I try to sound casual. Well, let me show you around, my friend. I followed him, trying not to stare too much at his peach. His sun-kissed skin and strong legs showed years of working outdoors. He pointed out different features of the farm, but I found it hard to concentrate on the tour. He was very friendly, gesturing with his hands a lot, which drew my attention to his thick forearms and callous fingers. So, tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do? I just sold my startup a few months ago, I replied, watching him from behind as he walked. I'm looking for a place to unwind after all that stress. This seems like the perfect spot. I can see why. He smiled. It's very relaxing here. I nodded, thinking about how great it would be to wake up to this view every morning. But even better, to wake up to this view every morning. You know what? Let me put on some clothes and show you around the house. Antonis said when we eventually made it back. He kicked off his sandals and picked up a towel from the kitchen counter, which he used to wipe the sweat from his chest and abdomen, while speaking about how many rooms there were and the view from the attic. And then he turned a bit, adjusted his waistband briefly, and wiped away sweat with casual indifference, as if this was simply part of his daily routine in the heat. He chuckled a bit, noticing my expression. Sorry about that. I had to really get in there. I couldn't help but feel a little guilty over how much I was attracted to him. He seemed like such a normal, down-to-earth guy, and I was having terribly improper thoughts about him. No, please. Do what you must. I replied, trying to play it cool. Sorry, it's just really hot today, huh? He laughed. Oh yeah, get used to it. I'd love to. He threw the used towel back on the counter and offered me a glass of water. Here you go, my friend. You must drink. Then he excused himself. Give me one moment. I'll find something to wear, and we can talk more. Well, that was a bit of a relief, I thought. Then to my horror, he walked no more than 15 feet away to a large pile of clothes in the corner of the living room, and with his back turned, proceeded to step out of his dirty boxers. I want to give him some privacy, but please God help me. I thought, this place really is heaven. I quickly averted my eyes, taking a large gulp of water to distract myself, before risking a quick peek at him again. He kept up the conversation as he tossed his sweaty briefs on the floor and took his sweet time trying to find another one from the pile. I felt my face flush red. I managed to control myself and turn my back respectfully, moving up to the counter to pour myself some more water. The towel left on the counter caught my attention. Antonis had just used it to thoroughly wipe the sweat off his things, and now it sat there, soiled and discarded. I picked it up absent-mindedly, noticing it still held the faint scent of the outdoors and his cologne. I quickly set it back down, feeling oddly flustered. I picked it up absent-mindedly, and as the scent hit me, sweat, soap, the sun, I froze for a second, oddly flustered. I set it down quickly, embarrassed by my own reactio. I felt a sudden heat rise to my face and looked away quickly, and I pressed it against the kitchen counter. Damn it, there was something effortlessly captivating about him. The way he moved, the ease in his smile. I wasn't prepared for this. I couldn't believe how unexpectedly drawn I was to him. Just then, Antonis walked back over, dressed in a pair of clean, loose-fitting shorts, and I hastily tossed the towel back on the counter as he was putting his shirt on, praying that he hadn't seen what I'd just done. He looked at my flushed face curiously for a moment as he stepped into a pair of sandals. "Du andai, Tao?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I'm great, actually. Your place is beautiful." "Ah, thank you, my friend. So, shall we go see the rest of the house now?" "It's really very nice." He smiled warmly and gestured for me to follow. The rest of the tour went wonderfully, and we even agreed on a price. It was a bit strange to find this young person seemingly on his own in such a large estate. When I inquired about his circumstances, he told me that his father was sick and that his treatment needed money they didn't have. His mother had passed away years ago. Occasionally, his cousins would live here as well when they needed more hands on the olive farm. I wanted to offer some sort of comfort, but didn't want to overstep any boundaries, so instead, I just nodded and listened. He said how much he loved growing up in this place. The late nights with his cousins, working with his dad all day to find his mom had made them his favorite food when they got home. I nodded silently, my heart starting to ache for young Antonis. And I could sense the sadness in his voice at having to leave all these memories behind. It made me realize what I've been avoiding all this time. While it sounded good in theory, I didn't actually want to spend the rest of my life alone in a large land in the middle of nowhere, and perhaps the answer was in front of me. I couldn't offer him charity, but perhaps. Antonis, I interrupted gently, would you ever consider staying on the property to help tend to the land if someone else owned it? He looked surprised, but answered immediately. I would like that very much. I smiled, relieved. I'll be honest, I'm not looking for a big plot of land to farm or profit from. Just a place where I can have some peace and quiet, and where I can think and work on projects. If you would be willing to continue taking care of the land and maybe, I don't know, help out around the house a bit, I'd be happy for you to live here as you have. I felt myself getting nervous, and before I gauged his reaction, I hastily continued. Of course, I pay you a salary as well, and a large cut of any profits you manage to bring in from selling produce or whatever else. Oh, and your cousins are welcome to help as well. I didn't expect Antonis to react with such enthusiasm. He came closer, looking me directly in the eye, a hand on my shoulder. That sounds great. I can't tell you how happy that makes me. We shook hands on it, and although I hadn't told him I was going to buy the land yet, I knew I would. Because Antonis would be in it. When I finally left later that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. The future never looked so bright. I'd found a new home, and perhaps more than that. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Antonis. Let me know if you need help with anything. Welcome to Greece, my friend. I smiled to myself. I knew I'd be seeing a lot more of his confident stride and natural ease from now on. And maybe more if I was lucky. The official paperwork took less than a week, which in Greek time, I was told, was a miracle. Antonis joked that maybe I brought some of that European efficiency with me, but I suspected he might have pulled some strings on my behalf. I moved into the farmhouse by the end of that month. My few belongings arrived a couple days later in the back of a rusty delivery truck that looked like it had survived 2 wars and a wedding. Everything smelled faintly of sea salt and dust. I didn't mind. I was here. The first few nights were quiet, almost too quiet. I was used to the constant hum of a city, traffic murmurs, late night shouting, sirens. Here, the only things that filled the air were crickets, the distant bark of a dog, and the wind rustling through olive branches. At first, it made me restless, like my thoughts had nowhere to hide anymore. But gradually, it became calming, like a lullaby I didn't know I needed. Antonis came by every morning just after sunrise. I always heard him before I saw him. The soft gravel crunch of his sandals, the sound of the gate latch, the familiar clink of tools in his hands. He never knocked. He'd just appear, shirt already damp from the heat, smiling as though he'd been up for hours. "You're still sleeping?" He teased one morning, looking down at me sprawled half asleep on the couch with a book on my chest. "It's barely 2 p.m., I groaned, shielding my eyes from the sunlight and from him, both equally blinding. "Lazy city man," he smirked, tossing a ripe fig at me, which landed squarely on my stomach. He laughed and walked away toward the grove. I peeled the fig and took a bite. Sweet and sticky. Like everything here, it felt real. Unapologetically so. We quickly fell into a rhythm. He took care of the land, watering, pruning, harvesting. I helped where I could, though I suspect more often than not I just got in the way. Still, Antonis was patient. He'd stand behind me, sometimes correcting my grip on a tool, his hands warm against mine, his breath close to my ear. It was maddening. At night, he often stayed for dinner. At first, it was out of politeness, then habit. Then, it just became something we didn't question. He'd bring over fresh produce, sometimes a bottle of raki his uncle had made, and we'd sit on the porch overlooking the hills until the sky turned to deep velvet. He'd tell me stories about the village festivals, about the wild goats that used to eat his mother's tomatoes, about sneaking out with his cousins to swim naked in the sea. I was learning him, slowly, carefully. One night, after too many glasses of raki, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me, his eyes half-lidded, the orange glow of the porch light soft on his face. "You seem different now," he said. "Calmer. I feel different." He nodded, but didn't say anything more. Instead, he reached over and stole a piece of fried zucchini off my plate. His fingers brushed mine for just a moment too long. I didn't sleep well that night. A few days later, a summer storm rolled in from the west. The sky turned slate gray, and the wind picked up quickly. Rain fell in heavy sheets, making the hills blur into the horizon. I lost power early in the evening. I was lighting candles in the living room when I heard banging at the front door. It was Antonis. Shirtless, soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. He was carrying a towel and a small bag. "I figured you'd be useless during a storm," he grinned, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You're not wrong," I said, trying not to stare at the way the rain glistened on his chest. He dropped the bag on the kitchen table. "I brought food, and a deck of cards, and the towel. For you. You look like someone who would forget to dry yourself properly." We spent the evening inside, listening to the rain crash against the roof. The power never came back. We played cards by candlelight. He beat me every round and didn't let me forget it. At some point, he moved from across the table to sitting next to me. Close, his thigh against mine, warm skin and damp shorts. My breath got shallow. He looked at me then, really looked. No teasing, no jokes. Just those dark, steady eyes watching me with something I couldn't quite name. "I like it here," he said quietly. "I like being around you." My heart stuttered. "I like being around you too." For a long moment, we just sat there, the air between us thick with the things we weren't saying. Then, his hand brushed against mine again. This time, he didn't pull away, and neither did I. Outside, the rain fell harder. It was late. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, the kind that whispered across rooftops and made everything feel closer, quieter. A warm candle flickered on the windowsill, casting golden shadows across the room. Antonis and I sat in stillness, our hands still lightly touching. My pulse was loud in my ears. When he turned toward me, there was no hesitation in his gaze, just warmth. Deep, quiet, unspoken warmth that had lingered between us for too long. His hand slipped from mine and brushed up my arm, slow and steady. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. I leaned in. He met me halfway. Our lips touched, soft and unsure at first, like testing the waters of something sacred. But the moment we connected, something shifted. I tasted the rain on his skin, the faint trace of raki, and the closeness we'd both tried to ignore for so long. It wasn't rushed. It was everything else. Intentional, gentle, real. We stood together, hands finding familiar paths, as if we'd always known where to go. I touched him as I had imagined, not in fantasy, but with wonder. Every breath we shared reminded me this was no dream. He kissed me again, deeper this time, as though the words he couldn't say were written in every movement. His lips brushed my neck, and I let out a quiet sigh, my head resting against his shoulder. "I love you," he whispered. "I think I've always felt it, just seeing you." I took his hand and led him toward the bedroom, the storm outside fading into silence. He followed, close behind, his presence steady, comforting. We found the bed by instinct, not urgency, though there was no denying the ache we both carried. His hands moved over me with quiet reverence, every touch careful, meaningful. Every kiss told a story we'd both been waiting to hear. When our bodies met, it wasn't hurried or fevered. It was slow, connected, built from longing and trust. He held me close, his forehead resting against mine, his fingers interlaced with my own. We moved together like a tide, rising and falling in unison, until all that remained was breath and stillness. Afterward, we lay there, wrapped in each other, hearts echoing in the quiet. It wasn't silence that filled the room, but something softer, something whole. He pressed his lips to my shoulder and murmured something in Greek I didn't understand, but felt deeply. I turned to him and brushed my hand along his cheek. "What did you say?" He smiled faintly, already drifting towards sleep. "Nothing important," he said softly. "Just that I hope you'll stay." I pulled him closer, my forehead resting against his. "I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, something new had begun. I woke to the sound of birdsong and the scent of wild herbs drifting through an open window. The sheets were tangled around us, still warm from the night before. My body ached in a beautiful, unfamiliar way. Every inch of me felt like it had been seen, touched, claimed, and yet nothing about it felt rushed. It felt earned. Antonis was still asleep beside me. He lay on his stomach, one arm stretched across the bed, the other loosely wrapped around my waist, as though even in his dreams, he didn't want to let go. The morning sun lit his back in long, golden stripes. It played across his spine, caught in the small curls of dark hair at the base of his neck. I watched him for a long time, maybe too long. Eventually, he stirred. His eyelashes fluttered, and his fingers flexed against my side. When his eyes opened, he looked at me without surprise, without embarrassment, just a calm certainty, like this was always meant to happen. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice still thick with sleep. "Morning." My voice came out hoarse. I cleared my throat and smiled. I didn't mean to stare. He stretched slowly, the muscles in his arms rippling under sun-warmed skin. I liked it. We lay there for a while longer in the hush of morning, our legs brushing occasionally beneath the sheets, neither of us quite ready to move. But eventually, Antonis sat up and ran a hand through his tousled hair. "I should make breakfast," he said, rubbing at the back of his neck and glancing toward the kitchen. "You don't have to." I reached out and trailed a hand along his back. "I'm not in a hurry." He looked at me, and for the first time since last night, there was a flicker of something in his expression. Uncertainty? Shyness? It was hard to name. "I've never done that before," he said quietly. "Not like that. Not with someone like you." I propped myself up on one elbow. "Someone like me? Someone I wasn't just passing the time with." He looked down, fiddling with the edge of the sheet. It felt different. There was a lump in my throat. I reached for his hand and laced our fingers together. It was different. He looked at me then, really looked, and something unspoken passed between us. It was still early, still fragile, but it was there. We got out of bed eventually. He threw on a pair of shorts. I grabbed one of his worn shirts. It smelled like him. The scent wrapped around me like a second skin. In the kitchen, he brewed strong Greek coffee while I sliced tomatoes from the basket near the window. We worked in comfortable silence, occasionally brushing past each other in the small space. Every glance felt a little electric. Every touch, no matter how innocent, seemed to carry the weight of last night. When we finally sat down on the terrace, the sun already high over the hills, I could see in the way he smiled at me, soft, a little hesitant, like he wasn't sure if this morning would change anything. But it had. "I should warn you," he said between bites of bread and cheese, "the village isn't very subtle. People will talk." I sipped my coffee, watching the olive trees sway gently in the breeze. "Let them." He laughed, a real, full laugh, and leaned back in his chair. "I think you might actually fit in here." I think I might too. We didn't talk about what came next. Not yet. But something in the way his hand found mine again told me it didn't have to be said. For now, we had this. The sunshine. The quiet. The smell of fresh bread. And each other. Life on the farm settled into a quiet rhythm. Days were filled with sun and sweat. Pruning olive branches, mending stone walls, carrying baskets of figs and grapes up the hill. Evenings brought the slow hum of crickets, the soft clink of glasses, and the scent of thyme and grilled bread. I found myself laughing more, sleeping better, dreaming deeper. Antonis was always nearby. Sometimes he'd pass me a tool, and our hands would touch just a little too long. Other times, we worked side by side in silence, sharing only the occasional glance that said everything we didn't speak out loud. He was never in a rush, never impatient. He moved through the land like he belonged to it, and more, I felt like I was beginning to belong too. But the village noticed. It started subtly. A pause in conversation when we walked by. A pair of eyes lingering too long at the corner cafe. Once, a man on a scooter slowed down as he passed the farm entrance, looking in with a little too much curiosity. Antonis noticed it too. He didn't say much at first, but I saw in the way he stood a little straighter when we walked into town together, and how he let go of my hand just a heartbeat too soon when we turned a corner. One afternoon, we stopped by the village market to pick up flour and eggs. As we approached the vendor stall, a short woman with silver hair leaned in and whispered something in Greek to her neighbor. They both turned to look at us, then at each other, then at the ground. Antonis stiffened beside me. He paid quickly, offering only a curt nod of thanks, and we left without another word. As we walked back up the dirt path to the farm, I glanced at him. His jaw was set, his mouth tight. Want to tell me what she said? He didn't answer for a long time. They say things, he muttered finally. Old people. They like to talk. What kind of things? He exhaled, kicking at a loose stone on the road. They say it's not right. That I've changed. That I'm being taken in by a rich foreigner. That I'm confused. The silence stretched between us. I stopped walking and touched his arm. Do you feel confused? His eyes found mine, and for a second I saw something flicker. Pain, maybe, or fear. No, he shook his head slowly. Not when I'm with you. Then forget them. He looked away, his voice quiet. It's not always that easy here. We walked the rest of the way in silence. That night, as we sat on the steps overlooking the orchard, I reached over and took his hand. He didn't pull away. The sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky in bruised violets and amber. After a long while, he leaned his head against my shoulder. I want this to work, he said. It will, I answered, though I wasn't sure how I knew. We'll find a way. And in the stillness of the coming night, I let my fingers trace lazy circles on his wrist. He closed his eyes. The wind rustled through the olive trees like an old song. When I was only just beginning to understand, it rained one morning. Not the kind of rain that soaked through roofs or turned roads to mud, but a slow, indecisive drizzle that left everything damp and hushed. The hills were a blanket of fog. The farm fell into a rare stillness. Even the cicadas seemed asleep. Antonis stood by the kitchen window, staring out at the mist. He hadn't spoken much that morning. His coffee sat untouched. I knew the look on his face, that faraway stillness, like he wasn't standing in the room with me, but somewhere far older, deeper, someplace I hadn't yet been invited to. You okay? I asked gently, pulling my sweater tighter around my chest. He gave a non-committal shrug. Just a quiet day, he said, but his voice was distant. I didn't push. I learned not to. Instead, I lit a fire in the small living room hearth. We sat near it, nursing warm mugs of mountain tea with honey. The scent of wood smoke curled between us. Minutes passed. The silence between us was comfortable but heavy, like something waiting to be spoken. He spoke first. My father used to say the land remembers everything. Antonis murmured, eyes fixed on the fire. Every stone you move, every olive tree you cut, even every fight you have under the stars, the land carries it. And it carries you. I didn't reply. He wasn't asking for one. He taught me everything here. How to graft branches. How to mend dry walls with your bare hands. How to follow the wind to find rain. He let out a soft, dry laugh. I hated it when I was younger. I wanted to leave. What changed? I asked. He leaned back against the worn couch, his head tilted toward the ceiling like the answers might live there. My mother got sick first. Not badly, just little things. Then one day, she collapsed in the orchard. He paused. It was sudden. She was gone before we could do anything. I turned to him slowly. I'm so sorry, Antonis. He nodded once, but his face didn't change. My father broke after that. He kept the farm running, but it wasn't the same. The joy left his hands. You know what I mean? I did. He drank more. Didn't talk much. Sometimes he'd sit on the stone wall for hours, just staring down the valley, like he was waiting for something. He paused again, rubbing his thumb along the edge of the mug. I was 19 when I realized I liked men, he said suddenly, surprising both of us with how plainly the words came out. That was the same year my cousin caught me kissing someone behind the olive press. He told everyone. A deep breath. My father didn't say much. Just looked at me differently after that. Not angry. Just sad. Like I'd let him down. I felt something rise in me. Anger on his behalf. Or maybe sorrow. And the guy you kissed? I asked softly. Antonis shook his head. Tourist. Gone the next day. I think he was more scared than I was. There was something bitter in his smile. Something a little older than it should be. I've never really left the island. I told myself I stayed for my father for the land. But I think maybe I stayed because if I left, I wouldn't know who I was outside of this place. He looked at me then, the firelight dancing in his eyes. Until you came. I swallowed hard. I wasn't prepared for how open he'd become, or how much that meant. You've held all that alone for so long, I whispered. He shrugged again, like it wasn't a big deal. But his hands were trembling just slightly. I reached across the couch and took them in mine, steadying them. Not anymore, I said. He looked down at our hands, then back at me. I want this, Theo. I don't know how to live it out loud yet. You don't have to. Not all at once, I said. We'll do it quietly, if that's what you need. One step at a time. The rain outside softened into mist. Later that night, he fell asleep on the couch with his head on my chest. The fire still glowed gently, and his breathing was calm, slower than usual, more vulnerable. I ran my fingers through his hair, thinking about roots, about family, about what it means to stay, and what it takes to become someone new without cutting down who you used to be. Antonis had lived a whole life before I ever found that listing, and somehow, he let me into it. It had been 5 months since I moved into the olive farm in Crete, and everything had changed, both around me and within me. The land had begun to feel like an extension of my own body, and Antonis, more than anyone, had become my home. The days settled into a rhythm that was somehow both peaceful and invigorating. Mornings began early, with sunlight crawling slowly through the wooden shutters. Sometimes I'd wake up to the scent of strong coffee wafting from the kitchen, where Antonis would already be shirtless, barefoot, humming to himself as he prepped breakfast. Other times, I'd open my eyes to find him still asleep beside me, one arm lazily thrown across my waist, his breath slow and warm against my shoulder. The land demanded much of us, but I never felt depleted. The olive trees stood proud and ancient, gnarled witnesses to countless seasons. Antonis taught me how to read them. When to water, when to prune, when to harvest. His hands were always busy, always creating or tending to something. Watching him work had become one of my favorite things. His movements were purposeful, but never rushed, as though he trusted time itself. And in that spirit, I had learned to slow down too. We shared more than just the house. We shared stories, silences, meals, moments stolen under the lemon tree, where sometimes we'd just sit barefoot in the shade, sipping wine from the same glass. He told me about his mother's cooking, how she used to sing while making dacos, and how he still hears her voice when he's alone in the kitchen. I told him about my childhood in the city, about being a shy boy who never quite fit, about the years I spent hiding who I was, even from myself. One evening, after a long day of work, we stood side by side in the open field. The sun had dipped behind the hills, leaving behind a soft lavender hue that blanketed everything. Antonis turned to me, wiping sweat from his brow. "You see that?" he said, nodding toward the sky. "Harvest moon's coming. That's when the real work begins." He had that look again, the one that made me feel like he saw more than just the surface of things. The harvest began with a fury of motion. For days, we were surrounded by neighbors and cousins, laughter and shouting, the rustle of nets being laid down beneath the trees. We picked olives by hand, our arms scratched and sore, our clothes stained with oil and dust. Antonis was in his element, and I fell in love with him all over again, watching him speak rapidly in Greek, cracking jokes, organizing crates, sharing swigs of cicudia with the older men during breaks. At night, we'd collapse onto the bed, too tired to move. But sometimes, despite the aching muscles and the dirt beneath our nails, he'd pull me into his arms, pressing his forehead to mine. I like seeing you like this, he whispered one night, with olive oil on your hands. I like being this version of me, I replied, smiling in the dark. We didn't speak of what we were to each other in labels. It didn't seem necessary. Everything between us was quiet and obvious and full of warmth. But one night, as the harvest season ended and the farm returned to a still hum, Antonis looked over his shoulder while washing dishes and said softly, "You know, my aunt asked me the other day if you were my partner." My heart jumped. "What did you tell her?" He paused, then turned off the faucet and dried his hands slowly. I told her yes. I said nothing for a moment, just watched the way his fingers moved across the towel. Was she okay with that? I asked. He shrugged, then grinned. She said, "Finally." We both laughed, the kind of laughter that makes you exhale something you didn't realize you were holding in. Winter arrived gently in Crete. The air cooled, the sea darkened, and we found more excuses to stay inside. One night, a storm rolled in, rain tapping the old windows like impatient fingers. The wind howled, but inside, the house was warm, lit by the soft glow of candles and the fire we'd built in the old stone hearth. Antonis sat on the rug, playing with his guitar, I didn't know he had. His voice was low, almost shy as he sang a love song in Greek I couldn't fully understand. When he finished, he looked up at me, his cheeks a little red. "What's it about?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "It's about two people who never expected to find each other, but who did, and now they don't know how to be apart." I moved from the couch to the floor, sliding beside him. He looked at me, and I reached for his hand. "Sounds familiar." That night, we stayed curled together in front of the fire long after the storm had passed. At one point, he murmured into my neck, "You make this place feel full again." Spring came early that year. The air grew fragrant with blossoms, and the first bees began to buzz lazily in the fields. One morning, Antonis and I stood beneath the apricot tree, watching the flowers fall gently in the breeze. "Do you ever think of the future?" he asked suddenly. "All the time," I said, "but less now, or maybe differently." "Ow!" I used to think of it like a to-do list. Now it feels more like a garden. He smiled. "So, what do you want to grow?" I looked at him. His eyes were bright, skin sun-kissed, hair tousled by the wind. "You," I said. He laughed, pushing me lightly. "Idiot. I'm serious. You mean this place. Maybe more animals. Chickens. Chickens are messy. Fine, goats." He nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, an old, slightly bent silver ring. "It was my father's," he said quietly. "He wore it every day until he passed. I've been keeping it, not sure what to do with it." He took my hand and placed the ring in my palm. I think he'd want me to give it to someone who gave me roots again. I stared at him, unsure whether to cry or laugh or kiss him. So I did all three, in that order. A year passed like that. We hosted our first olive festival in the village and laughed ourselves silly watching kids climb trees like squirrels. I started writing again. Real writing, not code or presentations, but essays, small memoir pieces, sketches of the land and the man I loved. Antonis's cousins visited more often, and slowly, I found myself speaking more Greek, fumbling through grammar, but welcomed with smiles and kind corrections. We built a small greenhouse together, adopted 2 cats, and repainted the attic. It was still the old stone house I'd first seen, but now every corner had a story, a memory. One evening, while watching the sunset from the rooftop with 2 glasses of wine, Antonis turned to me and said, "You know, I never imagined myself living like this." "Like what?" "Happy." I reached over and touched his hand. "Neither did I, but here we are." He raised his glass, and we clinked softly. "To unexpected beginnings," he said. "To you," I replied. And as the sun dipped below the hills, casting golden light over the olive trees and the rooftops of the sleepy village, I realized this wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of a life. One I hadn't known, I'd always been waiting for.